this is my second marriage. I really want to make sure that I do it right this time. I don't want to be back out there in the marketplace. We have kids together. Her prognosis was that we probably needed to start taking some time apart.
You just got to be coachable.
David, start out talking about like a little bit about your situation and where you went from trying to work on your marriage, what worked and what didn't, and how the DivorceStoppers program was different for you in a way that you got results from the program. What was the story with your family?
Well, thank you, Denver. Well, first of all, one thing that I had to realize over the years is I was just fundamentally not very happy in my marriage. I found myself being unfulfilled. It didn't feel like we were really communicating on the level. And I was really putting a lot of that on her. And so one thing I want to really impress upon people is how important it is to find yourself and find where you're accountable in the situation. Through this process, I realized that although for me, it was just a bunch of projection I noticed that she was falling short on so many things. Really in the end, a lot of it was just myself. And a lot of this whole process was learning myself how to fundamentally change as a person and how to change how I spoke to her and what I was putting out to her. So a little bit about what happened. So we had been really unhappy for about 2 years. And as I had mentioned before, a lot of that was really what I was projecting onto her. Obviously, a marriage is a two-way street. Whenever I started, detecting things weren't just quite jiving right, I started pushing for change. Of course, obviously, people don't want to be told that they're wrong. And so
Women don't want to be told they're wrong.
Right. Well, and so obviously, explain to her what she can do better. Probably not the best route, but you just don't really realize that at first. This whole process went on about 2 years. And so I thought being, responsible, this is my second marriage. I really want to make sure that I do it right this time. I don't want to be back out there in the marketplace. We have kids together. And so I decided, like anybody else, let's go to the marriage counselor route. Well, I went to this traditional marriage counselor, PhD, very smart lady. But, I basically dumped an entire college degree into this person. And we started talking. We did this for about a year. And then
what do you mean you dumped a college degree into it? Like the information you gave, or?
No, a college degree worth of paying. This lady, her certifications did not come cheap. And so it's
money. I see. Okay.
Absolutely. Incredibly expensive, incredible large time dump. And of course, doing this traditional route that she does, she basically came to the conclusion as we started talking and doing all these traditional classic exercises, that there was some fundamental compatibility issues. So what I was going there for was to fix my marriage and to save it. And what she was really trying to do is assess how compatible we were. And so unfortunately, her prognosis was that we probably needed to start taking some time apart, which of course was the opposite of what I was trying to do. And so it really felt like it actually almost drove a wedge in between the process between what I was trying to get my wife and I back to the same place.
So let me ask you a question.
Sure.
You were a client, you hired this doctor as a psychologist or counselor to help you mend your marriage, and her prognosis analysis of that situation. So you're the client, and
supposedly
you hired this lady to give you skills to mend your marriage, and she actually is recommending separation or divorce.
Right. And it was almost like she didn't want to give me the skill. It was almost like she was watching me, almost like I'm some sort of an experiment, and she's using her skills, but she's not giving me any.
I've heard this actually a lot. And I'm just curious if your situation was the norm of what I typically hear. What I hear a lot of times in this, not to be making this about female sex or male sex, but I hear it seems like more often if people seek a marriage counselor or a doctor, a doctor of psychology that's doing counseling, where they'll ultimately recommend that you're incompatible. They recommend a divorce. And it seems like I see that that's more a trend when you have a woman counselor, where they might have a tendency to listen to the problems and focus on the problems and talk about the problems, because that's so fun talking about your problems. I know I went through 2 years of that myself, but where maybe they're projecting that on their past lives as women counselors, and seems like sometimes they maybe have a tendency, not even knowingly, to take your partner's or your wife's side and kind of like it's two against one. Was that how it was in yours, or was it kind of different than that? I'm just curious.
No, that absolutely resonates with me. I think maybe it just comes from maybe a genuine need to want to help and advocate for the woman,
Yeah.
which I understand and I totally respect. But
Right.
we're getting off topic of trying to, give us the tools, try to mend this, not try to diagnose whether or not this even needs to be a thing, because that's
So
not why I'm there.
that makes sense. So you hired her saying, I need help. And then it sounds like maybe that with good intentions, she projected onto your wife a victim. And instead of trying to coach you guys, which is what I do, on how to mend the marriage, it was more so how to help her get out of it instead of teaching you guys on how to make it work. Right.
Right, right. And like I said, this took a whole year process. And ultimately, sadly, at the end of that, about a year later, I come home one day and, of course, she has all these ideas in her head. She has all these thoughts. And I come home and the kids are gone and she's packed up and she's telling me that she's actually been talking to somebody else for a few months.
And this was a year after you guys stopped seeing the marriage.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So the marriage counselor, maybe she planted the seed that you're not compatible.
Well, definitely that. And then, of course, also the part, where I have to own myself, where, I was, I hate to use the term, I was mansplaining to her how she needed to feel and not, bringing her on this journey with me and really being more in a question of asking, what can I do? Where am I falling short?
So you didn't get the skills from the counselor,
No.
doctor that should be trained to give you those skills on how to open up safe communication with your wife. So ultimately, now your wife didn't actually have an affair, but she was talking to somebody else. And that's, the affairs are common. And so we're just talking to somebody else. But typically when that happens, if the husband doesn't provide an emotionally, psychologically safe environment where the woman can actually say what's on her heart without fear of criticism, they will just by nature find that in somebody else. And it seems like, is that kind of maybe what happened a little bit in that scenario, that your wife was talking to somebody and you come home and she's gone, packed up, the kids were gone?
Absolutely. I really feel like instead of being able to train this Neanderthal here how to act properly, I was just basically being treated that was my nature and that was, and so sadly, instead of being able to open up and find out and probe properly with what she needs, I was just basically treated as an other by this program and by this other psychologist and ultimately by my wife.
If I remember correctly, you actually found a different marriage course that you tried also. And talk a little bit about that. Like, did you see any success from that, or why did that not work or give you the results that you needed? And then you ultimately found DivorceStoppers, our program.
Well, so obviously, with all these algorithms that are out there online, you're at home, you're on the internet, you're typing in all this stuff, asking about cheaters and rebounds and therapy. And of course, Google and everybody picks up on that. And all of a sudden you start getting all kinds of things in your social media feeds. And so one of these actually found me. And so it was just one of the more, I guess, graphically appealing. But I went on there and it was more of a Lone Ranger style program, do it all yourself, take control of your own life. And the guy really did have a lot of good tips, much like yourself. He was another male and he could really relate to me, which was nice. But the problem was where it ended up failing for me was I got a whole bunch of good tips, but just like my previous attitude of being the Neanderthal, the bull that was going to come in here and fix my marriage, he really kind of empowered that aspect of it. But of course, when it comes to relationships, a lot of this is reciprocity. All these reciprocal ideas of give and take, opening myself up. This really wasn't that. This was take back your marriage. It was still very forceful. And of course, as you know, honey works a lot better than vinegar to draw flies. And so whenever I'm over here trying to appeal to my wife, I'm still coming across as this very aggro, very aggressive. At the time we had a rental business together. So there was some basic bookkeeping. We would talk about the kids, but she really wanted nothing more to do with me other than that. And so through this other program, I was able to rack up a couple of wins, but anytime I would mess up, since I'm not learning these actual tools of how to actually change myself,
Wow.
we basically end up back at step one.
I love that. This is a story that I think I almost hear for 100% of the clients that we run through the Divorce Stoppers program, where they've tried some stuff like, figured out things on their own even, or went on YouTube and got some information and got some different phrases you can try and some different talk charges or touch charges, which do give some good results. But it's always the same thing. Modules are not about fake it till you make it. But for the first week, some of this stuff, it's not going to be real until you practice it. Some of this stuff, the first week of the program, we employ some of those things that are a little bit fake it till you make it, because it's not going to be genuine in your heart until you've been immersed in it for several weeks. Like, it's a new way of being. But I do understand the sense of urgency. Like, there is some people out there that will help in similar solutions, but they don't hit on those things. They don't realize or even teach or take into account that she's about to sign a lease, or she's already signed a lease, and now she's going to have to get a job and the kids are out of school. And they really can't even relate to it. Like, I know the only other folks out there that are teaching stuff like this, it's a guy, and he's brought in a family member. She hasn't been through these type of problems. She hasn't been divorced. She hasn't been faced with a separation where the spouse doesn't want to come back. And neither has he in the same program. Like, he was the one that left 15 years ago, and now he's talking about that. But he doesn't know what it's like to be left. He doesn't know how you feel because he's never felt that way. There's another program out there where there's this kid teaching it, and he's never even been married. So he doesn't understand the concept of, what if I have kids together and she needs to get a new mortgage and we have business a checking account together and all this stuff. He can't even focus on teaching that in the program or addressing that to help men because he's never experienced it. And that's one of the things where I feel like every client that I take on, because of my age, and I'm now a grandfather of 5, I can relate to all of that because I personally have been through it. I have been where all of my clients, I understand what it's like to be the cheater. I understand what it's like to be cheated on. I understand what it's like for the wife to leave. And ultimately, I try all this stuff, and it actually ends up in going down in divorce because the things that I would revert back to, it didn't work. All the wins, even changing who I was as a person, it didn't work because nobody taught me how to show that to her. And that didn't work in the first marriage. And in the second marriage, luckily I had studied marriage enough, and I had a wife that had a heart to help marriages as well. But then we had a tragedy, and she was out, and I had to figure out, what can I do to actually make her want to come back? So all of those scenarios, I understand and can relate to my clients. And that's why I also, in addition to the modules where we immerse you in this, so it's a way of being, so you don't have to memorize, phrases 1, 2, and 3. It changes how you think. So you just walk in the way that you react with her in a way that it becomes actually natural, real, and a lifelong change. But because of these unique situations that we're talking about with divorces and these long-term relationships and the financial stuff that goes with it and the stuff that can forever alter the course, even if you do stay married, if these changes keep moving in that direction for too long, that's one of the reasons that I do and have availability on my calendar for my clients, where if there's something that you're going through where you need a question answered right now, and you can't wait for that to come up in the module, like maybe that's in week 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, that I allow my clients to actually schedule one-on-one calls with me. And I feel like that's kind of unique to the course offerings and the teachings that I go through. And I know that you've actually took advantage of that a couple of times yourself. Was that different than other things that you had tried that didn't work for you?
Absolutely. Being able to get that one-on-one time, and then also being able to actually jump in and have other people, the other men in the program, being able to actually log in and watch what we were talking about in case they maybe had those questions in their own head. And that honestly just maximizes time because it's almost like group therapy and one-on-one therapy. So if I forgot a question, someone else could jump in and they could ask it, or, before I even had a chance to ask it or learn it from you. And one of the other guys brings it up. And it definitely helped me break that cycle of resentment and immediately set up a safe space to be able to, start tweaking and changing how I am and what I'm putting out there to her.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I know earlier on our call, we were talking about your therapist, like the doctor that you guys were seeing that recommended. But one of the things I want to point out too, like on the one-on-one calls that I do with you guys, or even as we're going through the modules and like teaching the steps of success to get you from zero to hero, is we call it coaching, because as you remember, we're always focused on you going from zero to hero. So we start out by saying the problem is you're at zero, but we're focused on the solution, which is getting you to hero. And so that's why it's a coaching program. I never have claimed, nor do I ever want to claim to be a therapist, because I've seen those therapists just like you have. And therapists always want to talk about your problems. And this course, and at my very core, I am very solution oriented, because it's nice to address what the problems are. But what we really want to think about is we're keeping our eye on the prize, and that's the solution, which everybody is attracted to the program because their solution is you want your wife back. But we kind of pivot on, if you want your wife back, the solution to that is, let's set your eye on the new prize. Let's make you a different man. And the man that forever alters and changes. I stand for something called legacy and connection. That's my stand in my life for this season. And I know that when I help a client, like when I've helped you, you have children and you have a stepdaughter, that in helping you save your relationship, you are now leaving a legacy of marriage that works for your children, instead of continuing to leave a legacy of brokenness, heartache, and divorce to your children. And so I just think that's very encouraging to children. But I've actually had from so many of my clients talk about their children's lives are changed, because it's so encouraging to the children to see mom and dad or mom and stepdad, even if you mess up your first divorce, to actually see it work in a second one, knowing that there was problems. And then, do you know how many adult people are in therapy today about they have made an intervow to themselves that they'll never get married because they saw mom go through 3 marriages that failed, and they're in therapy over that. And their therapy could have just been fixed if mom would have got with a coach that taught her a new way of being, so she would stop making those same mistakes. People that have been in 6 marriages, and if anybody's watching this testimonial and you've been in a 6th marriage, hey, we're going to make it so this 6th one is your last. Like, you're going to get to stay in it, right? That's our goal.
The value of what we're talking about is absolutely worth that constant mentoring and that guidance and that group. So that way it's not just me failing or me meandering off that path, but I have you and I have the other guys to kind of help, guide that for me. So and really it's a men's group as well as the actual marital finding a hole in your game piece.
Yeah, that sense of community, I actually partake in that as well with our community. And I enjoy being involved in that community as well, and sharing my losses in the past and how I turned those into wins. But it's so encouraging to me to see that you guys get so encouraged in the community that we've ultimately built here. And that's one of the things too that I felt like is a huge value to the program. Even if somebody says, okay, I'm at the end of 7 weeks, I got my wife back, I don't need to continue in the community anymore in the program, but we still allow men to stay in the actual community of collaborating with other men to see the wins and stuff like that, because that's part of the program, but we give that engagement. Can you share some of the things that she shared with you?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, one thing, like you had mentioned, the interplay between us and how we act together and how we mesh has been so fundamentally changed. And she really sees in me more now of a actual partner, that I am listening. I've always loved her. I've always listened. I've always been there for her, but by my standards, not actually understanding where she's coming from. I've really picked up the ability to really empathize with her. And it's actually even at the point now, even whenever we do have disagreements or fights, like all couples are always going to actually come from a place of love So it although it's challenging, she even almost gets a little bit of enjoyment out of it, just compared to where we used to be. Because used to the fights would be vitriolic, they'd be very very confrontational.
Yeah.
But now it actually feels like we're trying to come to an agreement, a place together. And so I would say probably just the biggest thing is learning how to disagree with love.
So you're saying that your disagreements have become fun for her because they're now creating a productive environment of understanding each other, right?
It's just a challenge now, yeah, and instead of this insurmountable fight.
Have you seen, since she sees that new way of being, that she brings more disagreements to you now because she feels safe in telling her thought or her opinion because she's not worried how you're going to react to it?
Absolutely. Disagreeing is not a negative. Disagreeing is a positive. Disagreeing is how you develop and move forward and get better.
I think you had said that she said that you're now that she feels like you're her soulmate now and that you guys have become best friends, right?
See, she's always been my soulmate, but now she sees it too, and she sees that in me. Yeah.
Okay, I got you. So now you're both in agreement with the soulmates, and she's feeling.
Yes. Yes.
I love that. There's so many men that's been in our shoes, that's walked before us, that actually their marriages ended because they were just hopeless because of what their wife was telling them. And their wife was telling them the truth. There's no hope. I want out. You're not changing my mind. And they were telling the truth, but we've both heard those same things and we didn't listen to it, because I always like to say that Instagram will always tell you if you love her, let her go. But if you let her go, not only are you in a failed marriage or another failed marriage, so is she. And if she can learn to be a productive spouse in the current marriage that she's in by following your lead, to me, that's what a real man is. And if I love my wife, I'm not going to let her go. If I love her, I'm going to show up and I'm going to show out and I'm going to give her the safest place on the face of the earth to be, where I am the husband that is the husband of her dreams, of the 1% of the 1%. And I'm going to spend every day the rest of my life in that way of being of that man. And even when I have a minute, she's not going to know I'm having a minute in the way how I emotionally respond to her, because it's a new way of being who I am now, where I am not emotionally reactive in a way that's going to harm her psychologically or make her feel that it's unsafe to tell me she has a disagreement. Of course, the reason God put us together is because she's the opposite of me. So even though we like the same foods, you might not like the same foods. You know, it depends on your marriage, but you're not supposed to be the same. You're supposed to be two different people that contribute equally in different ways and in different roles. And it's figuring out how do those roles work for you so that it's a safe environment where you can actually both feel like you're soulmates and one person doesn't feel lorded over or like their opinion is not valued. And so many marriages struggle with the wife really cares what he wants and she really cares what he wants, but the relationship turns into critical. Facebook would call it toxic, but I love it when I take on a client that has a toxic relationship, because those are the funnest to fix. Those are the biggest success stories when there is no hope and you can kind of let go of that psychological thinking that you're defeated already and realize that it's actually easy. It's easy. People kind of get, I don't know, like they don't understand it when I say that this is easy. Like when we're hurting and there's something that we want that we can't have, we want to psychologically take the hard road because, and we've been ingrained to feel like, well, anything that's worth anything is worth fighting for. Like, and fighting implies that there's hard work involved. This is not hard work. It's easy. Like, this is the easiest journey I've ever helped people take, that I took myself. It's the easiest thing I've ever done. When I went through this and did this myself, it was literally the easiest thing I ever did, because it's just step one, step two, step three. And I transitioned into thinking differently. And it was just almost like a miracle before my eyes as I saw it worked. And I started having so much happiness and peace in my inner being because I just knew that it was going to give me a new life, that I had really never had that before because I was in a new way of being. And that eventually my wife, like your wife, saw that. And because I loved her enough to figure this out and to become a different person, I remember before I was critical of her because I loved her and I wanted her to have a better life. So I criticized her areas that needed improvement. And now, in fixing my own areas and fixing how I respond and talk to her and even how I think, she follows my lead in that area because she sees how happy I am. And she actually understands that the new me doesn't need her to be happy for me to be happy. So she doesn't feel responsible for my happiness anymore. She actually told me today, she's like, I just love that we can talk and navigate through problems and even have a disagreement. And we are still so connected. And you know what? I actually said, you know what? I do too. I love that our emotion of love is no longer tied to, do we agree? And are you going to have it my way or the highway? Like, cause we don't even think like that anymore. And it wasn't because I was a bad person when I did think like that. It was because I didn't understand how else to think. Cause that's how my dad thought. And that's how my dad still thinks. He needs to go through my freaking program and he's not even facing a divorce. But he would have such a happier marriage if he did go through it. Any last thoughts that come to mind that you want to share with anybody that might be watching this?
Well, really, one thing that, just kind of pick up on something that you hit on, it's really more about having a gut check for yourself instead of trying to imprint on them how they need to be.
Would you say that it's very important, though, for anybody that's looking at joining our program, that they don't skip any of the steps? Because I know some people try that, and I know that you tried skipping a couple of steps because you were wanting to
Absolutely.
be faster than the 3 weeks that it happened for you. And then what happened when you skipped the step, right?
You got to repeat the step and then back up.
And it's so easy. You just have to patiently take them, though, right? It's easy. Would you agree
Absolutely.
that the program is easy?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole point is to make yourself better. Don't make it easier.
And
You just make yourself better.
would you also agree, though, in closing, somebody said this to me today, that even though it is easy, it's you doing things that are the exact opposite of how you feel, of what you feel like you should be doing, and that it is the exact opposite a lot of times of even common sense. Because when it comes to the heart, what our brain thinks is going to work, it's usually almost always the opposite thing that works. And people are too close to their situation to see it. That's the only reason that I have a business, that I do this, because if you weren't so close to your own situation that you could actually back up and actually see what would work, nobody would ever need me, and the world would even be a better place without somebody like me. And that would actually, I would be happy about that, because I can go do another business. But I love the distance that I have with people to see their situation. And I know when you come on board, you really thought your situation, there was a lot of private details we didn't share, but you thought your situation was so unique. And then as you go through the program, you found out, oh, this is not unique at all. There's so many people dealing with like
It's just relationships.
same issues, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all human, and these are all just human relationships.
Okay, gotcha. I know one thing that is unique to some people, and then we'll close here, is if you have biological children with your wife, or even if you don't, but if you also have a stepchild, a lot of times when that stepchild sees that you hurt mama, they're going to be like your arch enemy too. And I know that I loved hearing you talk about that was an issue for you. Like, it was an obstacle. Even when your wife wanted to come back, the stepkids were now living a new life because she had moved out and they were doing their own thing. And even though she was ready to come back, they weren't having it. And I loved how you shared on our last, like, I don't remember if that was like in the social media group or whatever, how you shared, like, you just stayed consistent with the program, and eventually they got more on board with you than they ever were, like, since the beginning of the marriage, right?
Well, once I changed, I changed. So,
Yeah.
that change stayed in me and just had to stay on the course. But yeah, I'm a different guy.
I want to give you an additional gift in addition to this free content. I want to offer you step 1 to begin the process of saving your marriage and getting your wife back, restoring your family with your lady. I want you to go to denvergriffin.com and register for my free masterclass. At the end of that free masterclass, just for a special thank you for attending that, I'm going to offer an opportunity to work with me. If you need the additional help, time is of the essence in many cases. Go to denvergriffin.com today. That's DenverGriffin.com.